Welcome to Auburn Community Television, Wave Channel 20, and this episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artist to introduce local artists in our community. I am LouCinda Laughlin, your host, and today our guest local artist is Robert Hill. Robert is an emerging artist in our community and is going to be participating in the Placer Arts studio tours coming up in November as one of the next generation. We are so pleased that we have the next generation with us today, and I'm especially pleased to have Robert. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you do clay art or ceramics, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you ended up with clay, but let's tell us a little bit about your background, because you're obviously not a young artist, so you obviously have a background to share with us.
I started doing construction pretty young, early 20s, and then moved on to welding, and then ended up being a mechanic for a bunch of years. And I've always kind of done little art projects or whatnot in my house in my spare time when I had it, and it's always kind of yeah.
So you're basically a man that works with his hands.
Yeah.
And so when you decided that you were going to finally embrace the artist in you,
yeah.
So and it ended up you went with clay.
Yes, I like clay for a lot of reasons. It's very hands-on, but there's a history to clay through time, and I'm also a production guy. I like the process of production. I like the whole thing. Clay is a very easy medium for me to work with. It's fairly inexpensive, and I like working with my hands a lot.
And you said you get to use a lot of different tools.
Yeah. There are different tools that you can use, or tools period, with ceramics, but yeah.
What I love about your story and working with clays is that you really epitomize where necessity becomes the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And that is going to start out when we're talking about the bowls that you have done. And you don't throw and work on a wheel.
No, I'd like to, but it's not conducive to how my life's working out right now. I don't have a place to put a kiln or a wheel. They're expensive. I'm trying to get through Sierra City College with my associates in a fine art studio, and I'm trying to get to Chico State. So for me to have a wheel and a kiln would be a huge distraction.
So then let's go to what you have come up as the remedy for not being able to throw your clay and make your pottery. And that is a molding process that I think is very unique to you.
Yeah. I like gardening, and it's always interested me to how you're done with your harvest. You grow your pumpkins, you grow this, you grow that. It rots, it disappears. So kind of for a tribute to things that I grow or things that are grown, I like to make it like a permanent. This is real. This happened. It's not going to decay or disappear. So in deciding not to do potter's wheel type things, I had to kind of think of, well, what can I do? And I was like, well, I'm going to take the pumpkins out of my garden. I'm going to cut them in half. I'm going to mold them and come up with this. It was kind of a whim at the time. And then when I was all done with it, I was kind of pretty impressed with myself, and I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. So then you try to do the 3 bowls, the nesting bowls, and I did that. And then I have a 3D printer, and I printed up a few things, and I ended up printing that. It's a nice 2 times the size raven skull, and I made a mold so that I have these, and I make these, and it's a 2-piece mold, and you press it out, and you push it together with some slip and this and that, and then sitting there, drinking coffee, and in the morning, I was like, well, what if I take one of my bowls, and I attach them for feet on the bottom, and I did that, and I set it down, and I was like, well, howdy, that looks really kind of cool. And then after that, I went and I figured out how to buy mass amounts of clay cheap. So I went and I got dark clay and light clay and darker or redder clays, and so I started doing, I'd press mold the skulls in a dark clay, and then I'd press the bowl in a lighter clay, and I put it together with a real simple.
Well, let's start back with using those pumpkins as molds,
Yes.
as well as other squash as molds.
Yes.
And you basically said you cut off the top of the pumpkin,
Yeah.
and obviously there's a lot of seeds and other
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
in there, so all of that has to come out.
Yeah.
Now, how much of the pumpkin meat inside, does that all come out? Or
No, I leave it all in there.
Okay.
For structural stability, so it doesn't collapse on itself. And then I actually save the seeds and use them the next year.
so then you have your clay.
Yes.
And are you rolling out your clay and then putting it in there, or what is the process that you go through?
I took that wear board, and I had screwed some rails into it at about a 1/4 inch. And then I take a nice kneaded round piece of clay, and I get my marble rolling pin, and I'll roll it out there to where I get a nice consistent 1/4 inch, and then usually it takes 2 little slices, and then I lay it within the mold, and then slip it up, and then I'll work it into the mold. And when I first started doing, they were real thick, but now I've gotten it to where I can get
They
them.
are. You have an incredibly thin edge along
Yeah.
here. So when you say you slip it up, what does that mean?
When you attach 2 pieces of clay, you've got to kind of make a glue, which is it's not dissolved, but clay with a lot of water in it.
Okay.
A lot of water, a little bit of vinegar. It's just a real sloppy glue, and then you score up your edge, kind of to make a rough surface, and you paint it on or brush it on, and you push it together. It's just to help the 2 pieces stay 2 pieces. And then I'll take and push it out, and push it out, and push it out, and then I'll use a nice little spatula, a wooden spatula, and scrape it out and get it nice and thin.
I was wondering, so that's how you get the process of this incredible thin edge.
Yeah.
So this was obviously a pumpkin that
Yes.
you used here,
Yes.
but you have a very small piece here. So what did you use as the mold for this particular one?
Acorn squash.
An acorn squash.
Yes.
And you can actually see the grooves of the squash along the side of it. And then you see on the inside, and again, this incredible thin edge that you've been able to get. This is beautiful. Now, this is a different color of clay than what we're seeing with these others that you have here.
Yeah.
So does this start with the clay being the color?
I have found that if I use a highly mineralized clay, which I can't think of where I get it, that's got that we have a lot of impurities in them. Mm-hmm. They react. They give you an impure reaction to glazing when you're trying to make it perfectly a color. You want to take all those impurities out. But if you want those impurities to react with your glaze, then you leave it in there. And I try to make, even though I can't necessarily control the colors, greens and very natural colors are hard. It just gets boring. So I try to make interactions between the glaze and the clay that look organic or look
very natural.
copper.
Yes. Now, how did you get this red color? Because this is an incredibly intense red. And I don't know if in clay you have a trouble getting red, but I tell you, when I'm working with pastels, it's a very, very difficult color to get.
Yeah, it's actually it's called Seriacha. Mm-hmm. It's a glaze we make at Sierra College, and it's pretty. Yes.
Intense.
Yes.
So
it's specifically made like it's like a cake recipe, and you mix it all together. We know what the outcome is going to be.
So this red coloring came in the glazing process then?
Yes.
And so when this bowl, would it have started out more of this color before you put the red glazing on
No, this was
it?
a very dark brownish,
Okay.
very mineral heavy iron clay just with the same glaze.
Oh, but it comes out, it's
Yeah.
almost a rust in this
Yeah.
particular one, so you can really see
So
The difference that you get with it.
That all has to do with a lot of oxygen or no oxygen towards the end of the firing or as you're firing it. So.
Now you also talked about, is this the pinch pot?
No,
this is this other, okay.
These are the pinch pots.
Okay, so that's something else that you do. So let's talk about how that process
why
is
they
done.
exist process.
Yes.
So kind of on a whim, pinch potting. I like to, in my pinch potting, I have found that I like to make things like perfect, make them look like a teacup that you see, make them look like this. And so I was sitting in my garage, and I'm not much of a drinker anymore, but back when I was, there's always that person that is too drunk or too far. They don't need to be drinking. So I decided to make a heavy, thick cup that you can manhandle the handle, but it's not an obvious, I can get my hand in there. And if my theory is if you can't hold it and drink out of it, maybe you shouldn't be drinking. So it's kind of just kind of what it was, a bit of whimsy, and surprisingly purple.
Well, then I think this would mean that I probably couldn't start out drinking at your house at all, because those are pretty heavy to handle.
Well, yeah. These are actually lighter. These are some of my very first ones that are very heavy. But,
now, you also brought some of your tiles, because you do these various tiles, and you have some there of all kinds of different designs that you've done. Now, this, I assume, again, is you do a rolling out of your clay?
No, actually, I have a mold that I made.
Oh, okay.
I just carved this out. I carved a ceramic tile out, and I just did this, and then I made a plaster mold, and then what I do is when I'm making all this, that little ball of clay that you end up having that gets dry up, I keep that little ball and I'll press them into these molds. And then I use these molds kind of, I like preserving like testing things. Like I like that preservation of that. So I use these as test tiles when I mix a glaze or when I make a glaze, or I have a nice piece that I don't want to mess up with I just made it or whatnot. I'll make these tiles.
Well, what I love about what you do is that then you take this design and you have created this incredible work of art here. So it actually now you have something that can hang on the wall. And I think that's really unique when you're talking about someone who works with clay. But I want to really quickly talk about this particular piece that you did, because this is what you got the Crocker Award for. And again, it's using this same mold, but you've put a paper over it?
Well, I made the process of making the mold, I used the clay, and I put halves of those on one little section, and then I made a mold. And then with that mold, I put paper pulp. Very carefully put paper pulp in there, and then let it dry, and then took 4 of them and put it together.
Well, it's really created such an incredible piece, and I can see why you got the Crocker Award for it.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, we have run out of time. So I know that you have some incredible pieces that you're going to be showing at the Placer Arts Studio Tour. So if you could please give the information about where you are on the tour and how other people, they can contact you if they want to talk about your art or find other things.
So I will be at the Studio C with the Andy and Shayna Laughlin on the Overhill Road. My name's Robert Hill. If you would like to get a hold of me, my email is ttrree@gmail.com.
And again, thank you so very much for joining us. And I want to thank you for tuning in to WAVE Channel 20, Auburn Community Television, for this episode of Meet the Artist. I hope to see you again for our next episode to meet another local artist.